Madrashe, a cross-pollination between Psalm 80 and Hymn on Faith 12. When I read Psalms and when I read the Madrashe of Ephraim the Syrian, from time to time I have the impression that there are connections which can help to understand both these psalms and these hymns more deeply. I'm just beginning to map out passages in Ephraim's work referring to the Old Testament psalms. Perhaps this paper can be a case study and part of broader future research. I could not find studies on this subject yet, but if there are, or if some of you noted similar connections, I would be most obliged for these data. Today I would like to have a closer look with you at Psalm 80 and at Hymn on Faith 12. Could Ephraim have written this hymn as a conscious answer to the psalm? Or was his thought so permeated by the psalms that he just had to make a reference here and an allusion there? Let us start with the older texts, briefly, and then move on with the time and explore to what extent Ephraim made use of these ancient verse lines. Psalm 80 is a song of Asaph, a desperate prayer directed to God for salvation and restoration. What stands out in this psalm is a culmination of supplications and laments, a cry of distress beseeching God to return to them and to save what is his own. The refrain of the song expresses the heart of the prayer. Powerful God, let us return, and let your face shine, that we may be saved. In the core of the psalm, which follows the second refrain, Asaph remembers by means of a poem how God brought his people out of Egypt like a vine, how he prepared the land for it to grow and flourish to mighty heights. Its leaves overshadow the mighty cedars, and its branches reached from the sea in the west to the great river inland. The blessing of his people was obvious. The anticlimax is all the more sudden. Why have you broken down its wall, so that all who pass along the way trample it? The boar from the forest eats it, and the wild animals feed it off. Powerful God, turn again, and look down from heaven and see, and care for this vine. Let your right hand rest on the man, and on the Son of Man you have exalted for yourself. The poet, in sackcloth and ashes, urges God to turn their fate. They pledge to be faithful. Let God give them life and save them, and they, for their part, will continue to call on his name. The psalmist hopes fervently and pleads for the restoration of his people, for the return of God's blessing on his flock, for renewal of the covenant. The psalm ends with a refrain, calling on God's name in full. Lord, powerful God, let us return, and let your face shine, that we may be saved. Now we will have a look at Ephraim's 12th hymn on faith and see how much of terminology and ideas from this ancient prayer of despair inspired him in his 4th century composition. Just like the 20 verses of Psalm 80, this hymn has 20 strophes. Only in the 8th strophe, the first and only clear reference to the psalm appears. It is the only strophe with an obvious overlap. I will point out some allusions as well throughout the poem, but what especially strikes me is the overall atmosphere of Ephraim's writing. The first strophe sets the tone and serves as an introduction to the song as a whole. He writes, "Season our minds with your salt, the truth. May we, our minds, produce fruits tasty to those who eat them. Unite in our minds knowledge and taste with contemplation, and may we give these to the infant ear. Isn't this totally different from Psalm 80? Even if this is a supplication, it is totally void of the tone of despair in the psalm. Instead, it rather breathes a humble confidence. The poet acknowledges his dependence on God's inspiration and expresses his willingness to serve others. And he seems to trust God to bless this attitude. Ephraim prays in first-person plural, as such including his supposed audience of fellow teachers. He wants all of them to be attuned to God's inspiring truth. Once the attitude towards God is right, Ephraim seeks to serve his fellow humans with his God-given truth. He expresses his hope that he and his teaching audience may bear fruit for those who want to accept their words, let's say the second or indirect audience. He prays that the seasoning they receive themselves may be multiplied as tasty fruits around them, horizontally. After this introduction, Ephraim wants to gather his fellow teachers in a humble openness to refinement and correction. They feel the need to check whether everything they are about to pass on to others actually conforms to God's measures. Let's read on. Your crucible is ready. Let each one of us bring whichever metal and teaching he mints and teaches. May your crucible expose it if it is a counterfeit, which is clothed in the likeness and outward appearance of the truth. Your balance hangs ready. Let us weigh our deliberations with you. Let your will be the counterweight to strike a balance with all our desires. And if our desire is of much less value than yours, perfect it in your generosity. Ephraim lived in a difficult and turbulent time. He and his contemporaries have not been saved from war, exile, sickness and contentions, which may function as a crucible. How can we compare this text with Psalm 80? Both psalms reflect a time of trials, but in the psalm it is experienced as a disaster, and in the teaching song as an opportunity to grow. While Psalm 80 focuses on God who needs to hear and act, and sounds almost like an accusation, this hymn starts with a humble search for the right human attitude, with a readiness to be accused and corrected themselves. Now, the focus of Ephraim's hymn switches to God and his goodness or grace, as well as his justice. Daibuto regimuto. He writes, the scales of your balance are grace and justice, and how and when they agree, you know it. While they do not match, still they do, for they are not discordant with the one Lord of all. Your balance provides the slight with something small, also the average with a weight comparable to them, a full measure for the mature ones, and also a merciful weight for the seekers. This is an ode to God. Even if it does not always seem likely, the poet acknowledges God's justice and goodness. Psalm 80 is full of questions. Hymn on Faith 12 is full of affirmations, no doubt about God's sovereign righteousness and kindness. The poet continues his ode, now extended to the theme of God longing for us to come to his paradise, and about his provision during our life to proceed towards his kingdom. Look, the bosom of your kingdom watches for the pure. Your paradise, Lord, watches also for the cleansed. The table of your kingdom waits for your 12, that they may recline there. By your rain, everything grows. By your dew, everything sprouts. Your teaching is hidden dew for the hidden earth. Lord, gather the fruit as a farmer, and offer to your Father a reconciling scale. How can we read this text with the perspective of Psalm 80? The psalm is about the poet's longing for God to enter and act. But this ode turns it around to express God's longing for his disciples to approach him. This is not just a passive longing. With the images of rain and dew, Ephraim evokes the awareness of our dependence on God's provision in daily life for the crops to grow, and its spiritual life for his children to mature and bear fruit. Even in the time of harvest, in the last days, we are not on our own. Note the exact words the poet selected. Kapo taruto. The word kapo could be translated as bundle or sheaf in this context of harvest. But I think Ephraim uses this word on purpose after his earlier image of the balance with the two scales in the previous parts. Also, the word takuto works like a flashback to this preceding part on God's kindness and righteousness. In Philippians 5, the word with the same root, was used to assert that God's balance provides for everyone according to his needs and ability. Accordingly, the present text reads like a prayer and an acknowledgement of dependence. So I paraphrase the last two lines. Lord, gather our scale of fruit as the farmer, and offer to your Father a reconciling scale, a scale of what you provide to balance our lack. What is at the heart of Ephraim's hymn? It is, I think, that we are utterly dependent on the Lord's provision and reconciliation. And this leads us to the core connection and polarity between the assurance of the hymn and the longing of the psalm, which makes Ephraim burst out in song, reminiscent of Asaph's poem of the vine. He writes, "You are the sprig of that vine from Egypt, which the wild boar killed ate. How it did grow again! A shoot sprouted, bearing the blessed bunch and the cup of the medicine of life. From among the circumcised and from the land of Charis came forth for us a scale full of new bread. From the bitter ones, a sweet fruit, and from the murderers, the healer who heals all. From a sweet root, the Son of David came forth, and from the thirsty earth, the source of life flowed for us. How could we deny that source which the merciful poured out on my thirsty fields?" The first lines are the clearest reference to the psalm. But there is more. Asaph's line about the boar eating the vine, an image of destruction in the psalm at the left, marks a new beginning in Ephraim's hymn at the right. It is as if the vine is being pruned. How it did grow again. The shoot that appears from the remnant is beyond all expectations. This root sprouted and bore the blessed bunch of grapes and the cup of the medicine of life. After this vision, the word zire, circumcised, appears to be a metaphor and should be read as the pruned ones, just like in the 11th Oath of Solomon. The poet seems to play with his double meaning. From the pruned ones and the land of Charis came forth for us a reconciling scale full of new bread, offered for us. Asaph and his people sound bitter and in tears. They yearn for life. But out of the seemingly endless pain and misery comes forth the eternal source of life. The painful process of pruning bears life-giving fruits. What makes the hymn so joyful is the realization that Asaph's desperate prayer has been heard and answered. God has blessed and exalted the Son of Man at his right hand. The Son of David triumphed over death and destruction, and he has and is the medicine of life, a scale full of new bread, the sweet fruit, the healer who heals all, the very source of life. How could we then withhold our thankfulness towards that source which the merciful God poured out on how thirsty feels. Reason enough for himself to abound in thanksgiving, and he certainly tries to entice all to join. So Ephraim bursts out in praise and glorification for the rest of the hymn, 10 more strophes in an ode to the poet's Lord. We'll have a quick look at 2 pairs of these, just to give a taste and to finish properly with the poet's praise for humanity's generous provider of life. Let's read. Your key shows itself to the one who seeks it. Your treasure rejoices in the thief who plunders it. For you rejoiced in the woman who stole from your hand, who took the medicine for her disease. Now, the poet's mouth overflows with images and stories, already 2 biblical references in 4 lines. The idea is the same. God likes to bless. He loves to give to the needy who boldly ask for him. As deep as Asaph's misery was, so bountiful is God in his disposal of his son and life. Be confident and stretch out your hand to the Lord, like the woman in the crowd in the Gospel of Matthew touched Jesus to become healed. Ephraim continues. Your leaven, Lord, longs for the dough of sinners, to transform and draw them to repentance. Your light levels the way of truth, removes the stumbling blocks and takes them away. Every image of daily life refers to God's divine truth. I like to bake leavened bread. I tend to bake 3 breads at a time, but less than a handful of leavened dough is enough to make all bread rise, if you're a bit patient. I enjoy the ongoing process. And this image evokes our wondering about God's patience and willingness towards a lump of human obstinateness. Just as he fashioned man at the time of creation, he rejoices in each one of us, returning to him in repentance. He longs for us to come nearer and light our way with his inspiring truth. He reveals stumbling blocks if we are open to his guidance and levels the path. These lines remind us of the opening of the hymn, when Ephraim prays God to enlighten us with his truth. But now it is turned into a prayer of praise. Ephraim continues this praise with a wave of images, all bearing witness to God's open arms and supporting presence in a multitude of ways. He often ends the strophes with an exaltation to give God the glory for his generosity. How will the poet conclude his glorification? The last 2 strophes are reminiscent of the first part of this hymn, in an inclusio of prayer and confirmation of God's refinement. He writes, your mirror is clear and is totally turned towards you. Your beauty incites the fall to be cleansed in it, for the dirty cannot adhere to you unless he rubs off the stains. Your hyssop looks out to purge us in its generosity. By your generous sprinkling, Lord, we are purified again. The Lord is not pleased with our fullness, for while he is just, he adorns us with his grace and beauty. Again, the prayer for refinement of the first part is here turned into praise for God's providence in purifying us. The Lord's mirror, his words, presents a faithful reflection of who he is. The scriptures show us his beauty and draw us towards it. We cannot but clean ourselves before approaching the highest king. In his hymn, Ephraim reflects the exemplary teaching of the scriptures. All the images and stories Ephraim conjured up breathe the spirits of God's character, enticing the audience to mirror him. His righteousness does not permit foulness in his presence, but in his grace he cleanses us and adorns us with his beauty and grace, and waits for our ship to arrive at his harbor. Let us conclude. If Psalm 80 is an expression of despair and and desolation, and yearns for salvation. Hymn on Faith 12 expresses fulfilled hope and the life-giving presence of God in a multitude of ways. The vine, the symbol of glory lost, becomes for Ephraim the symbol of the resurrected Christ and the medicine of life. If the psalm is a struggle of a poet longing to be heard and listened to, the hymn is an ode of thanksgiving because God is longing to support us and give us all we need in His bountiful mercy. Actually, Asaph is desperately dependent, like a person drowning, groping for the saving hand. Ephraim shows how to be boldly dependent, confidently, walking the bridge of Christ in faith. Asaph's song is a prayer, seemingly without answer. Ephraim's song jubilates because God did answer His yearning people, now in turn longing for them to respond, to live day by day, supported by His grace, dependent on His provisions, refined by His words, and adorned by His presence, which will lead into prayers of praise. Both terminology and theme show a clear influence of Psalm 80 on Ephraim's hymn. In addition, it became clear that the poet, Zerif Bird, turned around and transformed many of Asaph's images with his characteristic and creative antipodes. All of this makes me conclude that Ephraim composed a deliberate response to the old song of despair with a new song of confident dependence. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Charis, for an interesting analysis of one of St. Ephraim's hymns and its counterpart in the Psalms, especially since the outside world was challenging you as well. But are there any questions?
Yeah, just a question. Did you do the translation, the English translation yourself of the St. Ephraim hymn? If yes, congratulations, because it's very beautifully translated into English.
Thank you. I had help of an American friend who helped with the English.
Thank you very much for your analyzed paper. And I would like to place what you have found in the broader context of Ephraim. I wonder if you have studied other texts similar to what you have found here, because I wonder if this is the way Ephraim always wanted to answer to the Old Testament or not. So, what's your opinion?
The theme of dependence and humility and attitudes to God is an important factor I've studied in my master's thesis of theology 9 years ago. But as for the parallel between biblical studies and Ephraim, this is the first I do. So.
Any further questions? I have a maybe slightly tricky question. It's clear that Ephraim references to that psalm, but how would you describe this as anti-Jewish, or where would you situate it? Is it part of that known struggle against Jewish influences, Jewish presence?
Yeah, that's the part I cut out to make it shorter. I have made a paper on Ephraim and his anti-Semitism, as some call it in Dutch. But in this context of this, I think he just cannot understand if.
There's almost a jubilant claim of, all the rubbish parts of that vine are cut away, and the real vine is, that are we are the real vine.
Yes, but I think the focus of Ephraim is on God's plan, which he folds perfectly, and he just cannot understand how people who have been praying for so long wouldn't accept the gifts, the answer to that prayer. In this context, I think it's rather that thankfulness is of major importance for Ephraim, and if they don't accept, he cannot understand. So in this context, I think it's just that.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else wants to say? If not, then we can go as the first troop to the tea and do not have to stand in line. May I thank all the speakers and the